Are you feeling wired and activated on the one hand, but tense and stuck on the other? That's the body's freeze response, which is effectively when your nervous system has the accelerator and the brake pressed at the same time. And there's a kind of freeze they call functional freeze, which is when, despite the brake being on, you're still able to act and behave in your life normally. And it may look from the outside that you're actually very composed and productive and that you really have your shit together, essentially. But on the inside, you can feel quite brittle and tense and putting a lot of effort. It's very perfectionistic. There's a lot of controlling and planning going on. Your life isn't sort of flowing in that natural way that you might imagine is possible. And today we're going to look at 5 signs of that functional freeze and 5 exercises you can do to help soften that and step a bit more into that naturalness. Now, what's happening with the freeze response is that over time there's this big sympathetic activation, fight or flight, that's become trapped in the body. That fight wanting to help you, fight your way out of situations or run away or just, get angry, say no to someone, or just take yourself out of certain situations, relationships, jobs, environments, whatever it might be. But it's really unsafe to allow that. The other person's going to get angry, they're going to be disappointed, or maybe it's at your job and you can't just yell at your boss and quit. You've got to look after your kids. So what do you do with all that energy? The body locks it in. It freezes and locks in all that energy, which helps keep it at bay and helps you to function in the world, that functional freeze for the time being. But as this happens again and again and again, it can become a chronic state. So the freeze is originally designed just for a moment by moment. Think of deer in the headlights, or when you step into the road and there's a bus coming, suddenly you freeze and then a moment later you step out the way and it relaxes. But if we've grown up in environments where there's a chronic sense of threat or unsafety, that freeze can become a permanent way of being. So what does that look like? The sign number 1 is that, the muscles are tense. The body has become rigid to physically hold in that energy. The throat in particular, you may notice, gets tight to hold in the expression. We might notice a contraction there, or numbness, or a lump that's preventing you from, saying certain words that might represent that fight or flight, that anger, or expressing your opinion when it feels unsafe. The second is the breath. So, the muscles of the rib cage might tighten in particular, and you'll find it's quite hard to breathe deeply. It'll be quite shallow, that upper chest. You may notice micro holding of the breath. So you'll just be reading your book and all of a sudden you notice that you've been holding your breath for 15 seconds. And then there's a sudden, I notice I do that quite a lot myself. The third one is speech. Imagine, have you ever been in a room where someone says something awkward and then suddenly everyone goes silent? That's that freeze kicking in. It's kind of like a deer in the headlights, but socially, with social awkwardness. And it's, that speech, we often filter what we say because there's that restriction because it feels unsafe to express ourselves completely openly. Or we might just be quite quiet generally in a way that feels kind of unnatural. Or we might use humor or intellect to avoid dropping into the body. The freeze tends to be very mental. We go up into the head and we try and control and manage from the head because the body is very activated and very frozen, and so it feels really can feel very painful to be there. So we jump into the head, which is where we're controlling things and planning and managing. And this brings us to number 4, which is in terms of our behavior. We are able to move through, work with this freeze or in this frozen state, but it tends to be very sort of productivity oriented or performative or perfectionistic, just generally speaking, because that's how we've learned we have to be. We have to suppress and abandon what's really true for us, and we have to perform and do the thing that keeps everyone around us happy. And again, we jump into the mind to do this, and we try and plan and control things very carefully to make sure that happens. Because when we're being really authentic and natural, there's much less planning because we're not worried too much about what others are going to think. We just say, I'll be myself and let the chips fall where they may. Number 5 is that emotionally we tend to be a bit more blunted or numb. It's a bit difficult to tell what's going on. Again, that layer of freeze tends to disconnect us from the deeper layers of emotionality. At the same time, we can often have quite a short temper or be quick to drop into a panic because those energies are sort of just below the surface. They're what's being held in by the freeze. And so when we get triggered, they can burst through and we have a sudden burst of anger or irritation or a sudden volcano of panic and fear that then can also get sucked back in as quickly as it burst out. Those are the 5 signs. There's a quick note on the difference between freeze and shutdown. So freeze has as its call sign this combination of the activation wanting to go up and the freeze locking it in. So it's the upward movement and a downward movement. Whereas shutdown is sort of more like a limpness, a collapse. You could think of freeze as being more like a deer in the headlights, and the shutdown is more like a mouse playing dead in front of a cat. It's completely limp. There's no activation going on there. So let's get onto some exercises, just a few ideas that you can practice, and pause the video and try them out and to see how that feels for you. Overall, this is a long-term thing of slowly learning to connect to the body and to help give that freeze what it needs, the attention, so it can start to melt. And then what can happen then is that the sympathetic energy underneath can start to come to the surface, the anger and the fear and so on. And you can check out my other videos for a bit more details on how to do that. But it's worth noting here that you can't really think your way out. That's more of the managerial mind coming in. What we need to do is just gently come into the body and give it the safety and support it needs. So here's a couple of ideas. You can just bring your hands to the heart and just notice how that feels. Maybe rubbing that with your thumb or moving the fingers gently. Really feeling a bit of holding or support you're giving yourself, and then just gently starting to sway. Maybe you just rub the arms on the chest a little bit, and it's that touch and that swaying that signals to your nervous system that you're safe, that you're being held and supported, and that the environment's safe enough to move slowly, so it must be all right. And you would just stay with that for a few minutes. So you can pause the video now and just stay with that for a few minutes and notice how it feels. Again, it doesn't need to be big sways, it's very small. Or you can experiment. If it doesn't feel nice on the heart, you can give your arms a squeeze or give yourself a little hug. That's a nice one too. The second one would be to take these butterfly hands and just start tapping. That activates the vagus nerve, as does humming, which you can do at the same time. And again, you would stay with this a minute or two and just noticing the difference of how you feel at the start and the beginning. And it can help just to take the edge of that unsafety off. I can notice it already just with this tapping. There's just a slight softening in my experience. But just be patient. These things don't completely, revolutionize your experience overnight, but by practicing them regularly every day, it can start to shift things. A third idea that can help you to regulate yourself is to imagine a safe place or a safe person or a time when you were happy. So just really go into your imagination and imagine maybe there's a place where you felt completely at ease. There was a tree house you used to be in when you were young, or there was a certain friend's house where you always, they had a really nice family, you always felt safe there, or your grandma's house, and when she would make you, give you ice cream and put the fire on, or whatever it might be, and just really take yourself there and just imagine you're in that place and that you're safe and that you're held, and then just notice how that impacts the body. And again, just give it a few minutes and just really make it real in your mind, and just really noticing all the different details. And as you imagine that place, you can keep imagining it and go there again and again, and the more you imagine it, the more you can build a connection with that place or that person. And it could be anything. It could be a religious figure, a spiritual figure who comes in to support you. It could be a friend. It could be a pet you've had. The sky's the limit. Just any place or situation where you felt some safety or some support from someone else, or the place. Now, when it comes to freeze, you don't just want to regulate and soften. You also need to get some movement going. Otherwise, there's all that sympathetic activation underneath that's not got anywhere to go. So a couple of quick exercises that are a bit more mobilizing now. You've melted the immobilization a little bit, and now we bring in the mobilization. So you can press against the wall, which I'm going to do it in midair here, but you just find a wall and press your palms against it and just push gently into the wall for about 8 seconds, 10 seconds. Keeping your attention in your shoulders and your arms, noticing the aliveness, the energy, noticing the activation in your body as it has to come alive to press. Then after 10 seconds, just take a little break and just do 3 rounds of 10 seconds of pressing and then 10 seconds of rest, or 15 seconds. And then just comparing how you felt at the beginning to the end. Then similarly, you can just really tap into that buzzed, wired feeling underneath and see if you can feel into it and start to just to shake to allow it to move through. So you can just shake out the hands and bounce on your knees. Again, keeping your attention in the body. So you're not up in your head thinking about what's going on yesterday or tomorrow. You're just noticing that buzzing, that wired feeling, and helping it to move through. You can even shake. I know you can't see my legs hit, but give my legs a little shake. You can just do that for 30 seconds, then again rest, and then maybe do another 30 seconds if you feel it. And if you take a few minutes to do these, I think you can notice just slight shifts each time you do it as you just soften and activate and soften and activate. So I hope that helps. I do help people with this, working with them one-on-one, so check out my links below, and I have plenty of other videos on how to get in touch with your body, with your emotions, work through emotional wounds and traumas, get in touch with yourself and all that juicy jazz. So take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.